There are moments when you catch yourself looking at your own life from the outside, as if watching a well-rehearsed play where every line is predictable, every gesture familiar. You smile on cue, nod when expected, pour the wine at the right moment. You know exactly how the evening will go, how the conversation will flow, and even what your husband will say before he opens his mouth. It was one of those nights. The house smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary. The table was set the way he liked it. Clean lines, no clutter. Two white candles flickered calmly between the plates, adding a sense of warmth to the otherwise cold symmetry. I wore a simple, soft beige dress that fell just below my knees, the kind of dress that doesn't ask for attention but flatters the figure just enough. My husband always appreciated that. Balance, good taste, nothing excessive. His father was visiting. Not for the first time, of course. He'd been part of these family dinners for as long as I could remember, always arriving with a polite smile, a bottle of wine in hand, a firm handshake. But something in the way he entered the house that evening felt different. Or maybe it was me who had changed. Maybe I had begun to notice things I had ignored before. He complimented my dress, not in the careless way men sometimes throw words without looking. He noticed. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately, from the hemline back up to my face, holding my gaze just half a second longer than necessary. Just long enough for me to feel the blood rush to my cheeks. I laughed it off, of course. A soft, practiced laugh. The kind of laugh I had learned to use over the years when I wanted to dismiss something without truly dismissing it. Dinner went as expected. My husband talked about work, about the latest projects, about the neighbors planning to sell their house. His father listened, chimed in here and there, asked polite questions. I refilled their glasses, smiled, played my role. But the truth is, I wasn't really listening. I was watching. Watching the way his father's hands rested on the table, the way his fingers moved as he spoke, calm and sure. Watching the way his eyes shifted toward me when my husband wasn't looking. There is a kind of hunger that builds not from absence but from monotony. When everything is so perfectly in place that you begin to crave the crack in the surface, the little fracture that lets the air in. My marriage was not broken. It was stable, comfortable, a well-oiled machine. But machines don't make your heart race. Machines don't make your skin burn at the thought of being touched. After dinner, my husband excused himself to take a work call outside. I stayed behind, gathering the plates, stacking them carefully by the sink. His father stood, offering to help. I told him it wasn't necessary. He stayed anyway. It was the silence between us that spoke the loudest. The clink of porcelain against porcelain, the soft rustle of fabric as we moved in the small space of the kitchen. Twice our hands brushed as we reached for the same plate. Twice I pretended not to notice. "You always take care of everything," he said quietly, almost as if to himself. I glanced up, meeting his eyes. There was no smile this time, only that steady, deliberate gaze. "It's what's expected," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us felt heavier, charged. I could hear the faint murmur of my husband's voice outside, talking about shipments and deadlines, oblivious. I felt the heat rising under my skin, an ache I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge for too long. I looked away first, reaching for the last of the dishes, focusing on the simplest task to anchor myself. But even then, I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. I told myself it was nothing, that it would pass, that I was imagining it. But as I turned off the kitchen light that night and climbed into bed next to my husband, who was already asleep, I couldn't shake the feeling of that gaze following me into the dark. And somewhere deep down, I knew. This wasn't over. The following days fell back into the rhythm of routine, as they always did. Morning coffee in the same white mug, emails answered, laundry folded, the house returning to its quiet, predictable self. My husband was busy, as usual. Meetings, calls, deadlines. Even at dinner, he'd glance at his phone between bites, nodding absent-mindedly to my questions. offering the same familiar lines about how much he appreciated my support, my steadiness. I had learned not to expect more. But knowing and feeling are never the same thing. I smiled. I listened. I played my part. It was a Thursday afternoon when my husband asked me to stop by his father's house. A small favor, nothing unusual. Drop off a package of medicine he had forgotten to pick up at the pharmacy. My husband had a late meeting. It would be easier if I handled it. Easier. Such an ironic word for a request that would make everything much harder. I didn't hesitate. Of course I'd go. Why wouldn't I? I took my time getting ready, though I told myself I wasn't. I chose black trousers that hugged my hips just right and a soft cream blouse that buttoned neatly at the top but hinted at the curve of my collarbone. Not too much. Just enough to feel seen. Underneath, pale pink lace. Simple? Beautiful. Not for him. For me. At least that's what I kept repeating in my head as I smoothed the fabric down my sides. The drive was short. I rehearsed the conversation in my head. Casual, polite, no lingering. Just hand him the package, exchange a few words, leave. Easy. He opened the door with that same calm smile, standing there in a dark gray sweater that clung a little too well to his chest, sleeves pushed back to reveal strong forearms. His hair was a little tousled, like he'd run his fingers through it more than once that day. He thanked me, took the package from my hands, gestured for me to come in, just for a minute. He'd make coffee. I should have said no. I meant to say no. But instead, I stepped inside. The house was warm, lived in, with that faint scent of cedar and aftershave that seemed to follow him wherever he went. I sat at the edge of the couch, legs crossed, hands folded in my lap as if I could hold myself together just by the force of posture. He moved through the kitchen easily, as if this were all perfectly normal. We talked about simple things. How busy my husband was, how the garden was coming along. His voice stayed low, even, comfortable. But there were moments, small pauses between sentences where his eyes would rest on me just a moment longer than necessary. Not obvious, but felt. I noticed my own voice softening, my body leaning slightly toward him without meaning to. A laugh too quick, a smile that held a little too long. When he brought the coffee, he sat across from me, not beside me. A safe choice, sensible. But the space between us still felt too small. "You look tired," he said quietly, his eyes studying me. "It's just been a long week," I replied, my fingers tracing the rim of the coffee cup. "You do too much," he added. "You always have." The words caught me off guard, not because they were so unusual, but because they sounded like he meant them, like he saw me. Not the role I played, not the version my husband had grown used to, but me. I swallowed hard, looking down, feeling the heat rise beneath my skin again. When I finally looked up, his eyes hadn't left my face. There was a silence then. Not the awkward kind. The kind that fills a room like fog, soft but heavy, waiting for something to break it. I stood, more to escape the weight of that moment than out of necessity. "I should go," I said, my voice low. He stood too, moving closer. Not fast, not aggressive, just sure. The space between us evaporated before I could step back. His hand reached out, resting gently on my wrist. A simple touch, but I felt it like electricity through my veins. My breath caught in my throat. "You don't have to," he said softly. I should have pulled away. I should have stepped back. I should have laughed it off, played it safe, pretended it meant nothing. But I didn't. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. His eyes held mine, steady, unflinching. When he leaned in, it was slow, deliberate, giving me every chance to stop him. I didn't. Our lips met in a kiss that was soft at first, hesitant, almost questioning. But then something inside me snapped. A thread pulled too tight for too long, finally breaking free. I leaned into him, pressing closer, my fingers tangling in the fabric of his sweater as if I could hold on to that moment, keep it from slipping away. It wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not like this. But when his hand slid to the small of my back, pulling me closer, when his lips pressed harder against mine, I felt my body respond before my mind could catch up. My skin burned where he touched me. My chest rose and fell against his. I could feel his breath, warm and hungry, matching my own. And then it stopped. I pulled back first, breathless, eyes wide. The weight of what we had just done settling between us like a stone. I shouldn't have. I started, but the words felt meaningless. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He just stood there, watching me, his chest rising and falling, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. I turned away, grabbing my bag, fumbling with the strap as if that small task could somehow return things to normal. I should go, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. This time, he let me. I walked out the door, down the front steps, into my car. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, my heart still racing, lips still tingling from the feel of his kiss. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring out the windshield, the weight of what had happened pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. But the worst part wasn't the guilt. It wasn't the fear of what might come next. The worst part was knowing that I wanted more. I spent the next few days drowning in the safety of routine, folding laundry with almost manic precision, wiping down countertops that didn't need cleaning, scrolling through emails without reading a single word. I stayed busy. Busy is good. Busy keeps your hands occupied so they don't shake. Busy fills the silence so you don't have to hear your own thoughts. And yet, in every quiet moment, my mind drifted back to that kiss. The heat of his hands on my waist, the weight of his gaze holding me in place long after I had walked away. It haunted me. Not in the way regret haunts, but in the way desire does, returning again and again, demanding to be felt. I kept waiting for him to avoid me, to call and offer some formal apology, to make it easier for me to pretend it had never happened. But the apology never came. Instead, at the next family dinner, he was there. Sitting at the same table, passing the salad bowl with the same calm smile, engaging my husband in polite conversation about the latest market trends. Like nothing at all had happened between us. Like we were all exactly where we had always been. But he knew. And worse, I knew that he knew. I wore a navy blue dress that evening, modest in cut but soft against my skin, the fabric hugging the line of my waist before falling loosely at the hips. Underneath, pale silk, ivory, smooth against my body in a way that felt like a secret I wasn't supposed to be keeping. I told myself it was just the first thing I'd grabbed from the closet. I lied to myself so easily. Throughout dinner, I felt his eyes on me. Not constantly, not enough to catch anyone's attention, but often enough that my skin prickled under the weight of it. He never stared, just watched. Subtle. Patient. I caught myself leaning forward when I laughed, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear a little too slowly, offering him a view of the soft curve of my neck. Not on purpose, I told myself. And yet, after the meal, my husband excused himself to take a call. Another meeting that couldn't wait. The same predictable excuse. I cleared the plates, stacking them quietly in the kitchen sink, just as I always did. I could feel him move behind me before I heard his voice. "You always do more than anyone notices," he said, not loud, not soft, just steady. I didn't turn around. My hands gripped the edge of the sink, knuckles whitening. My voice, when I found it, was thin and careful. "It's just what has to be done." "Is that what you tell yourself?" His tone wasn't cruel. It was worse. Honest. I closed my eyes, willing the heat in my chest to settle. I heard the faint hum of my husband's voice in the next room, too far to catch the words, close enough to remind me exactly where I stood. I should. I started, but his hand rested lightly on my shoulder, stopping the words before they could find their shape. I'm not asking for anything, he said quietly. I just see you. That was the worst part. Not the kiss, not the risk, but that he was telling the truth, that he saw me. I turned then slowly, keeping the space between us, clinging to that last thread of resistance like it could still hold. His eyes met mine, steady, searching, waiting. I wondered if he could see the war playing out behind my eyes, the need to stay, the need to run. I didn't run, but I didn't move toward him either. Not yet. I forced myself back into the rhythm of the evening, clearing dishes, offering him no more than a nod before stepping away, retreating upstairs to our bedroom. My husband's voice drifted through the hallway as he wrapped up his call, still absorbed in whatever negotiation had kept him away from the table. I stood at the dresser, brushing out my hair, my hands moving mechanically. My reflection stared back at me, eyes too bright, lips too flushed. I looked like a woman caught between two versions of herself, the one she had always been, and the one she was becoming. That night, when my husband climbed into bed beside me, his arm draped casually across my waist, I lay stiff beneath the weight of it. His fingers traced idle circles along my hip, familiar, absent. I closed my eyes, willing my body to respond the way it used to, the way it was supposed to. But every touch felt distant, dull. I thought of the hands that had gripped my waist 2 days before, the lips that had found mine, hungry and certain, the eyes that had made me feel naked long before I had ever undressed. The next morning, the ache hadn't gone away. I told myself again that it had been a mistake, that I would keep my distance, avoid the chances for anything more to happen. But when the phone buzzed that afternoon and his name flashed across the screen, my breath caught in my throat. It was a simple message. Pardon me if I crossed a line, but I don't regret it. No apology, no excuses, just that. I didn't answer. I read the message once, twice, 10 times. Then I deleted it. But the words stayed, and with every hour that passed, so did the wanting. Not fading, growing. I didn't expect the invitation. It came casually, in passing, tucked between a conversation about schedules and family obligations, so neatly placed that it might have seemed innocent to anyone else. We're thinking of doing a small weekend trip out to the lake house, my husband mentioned one evening over dinner. Dad suggested it, said it's been too long since we've all gone out there together. I nodded, chewing slowly, keeping my expression steady. The lake house. I knew the place well. A quiet, secluded property 2 hours outside the city, surrounded by pines, a wraparound porch with old wooden railings worn smooth from years of weather. A place designed for relaxation, simplicity, distance from the noise of the everyday. A place where the walls were thin and the rooms were too few. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Packing bags, planning meals, coordinating logistics. My husband, predictably, was absorbed in work until the last minute, leaving the bulk of the details to me. I told myself that was fine, that it was better to stay busy, better to focus on to-do lists than on the tightening knot in my chest every time I thought about that house, about what it meant that his father had been the one to suggest it. I chose my clothes carefully, though I pretended I hadn't. Comfortable, practical, the kind of pieces a woman packs for a quiet family getaway. But beneath the soft cotton tops and simple jeans, I packed lingerie that I hadn't worn in months. Ivory lace, thin straps, silk so light it felt like breath on the skin. I told myself it was just habit, that it didn't mean anything. I lied. Again. The drive out was uneventful. My husband insisted on taking the wheel, eager to prove himself capable of unplugging, even if only for the weekend. His father rode shotgun. I sat alone in the back, a book open on my lap, my eyes moving over the words without absorbing them. We stopped once along the way, a gas station with a small market attached. My husband disappeared inside to grab drinks and snacks, leaving the two of us in the car, the engine idling softly beneath us. The silence settled between us almost instantly. Familiar now, heavy with all the things we weren't saying. I kept my gaze fixed out the window, tracing the lines of the horizon where the fields met the sky, pretending I didn't feel his eyes on me. "You've been quiet," he said finally, his voice low. "I'm tired," I answered, the words automatic. "You're lying," he replied, and there was no anger in it, just certainty. I turned then, met his gaze, forced myself to hold it. He didn't look away. "I'm trying to do the right thing," I said, quieter than I meant to. "And how's that working out for you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The moment broke when my husband returned, arms full of bottled water and chips, oblivious as always. We continued the drive, the tension between us sealed up again, tucked beneath the surface where neither of us could admit it out loud. The lake house stood just as I remembered it, tall and narrow, dark wood against the green of the trees, the air fresh and cool even under the weight of summer. Inside, it smelled of cedar and dust, the faint musk of time and memory soaked into every beam. The rooms were small, the walls too thin to keep out sound. There was no avoiding each other here, no polite distance to maintain. That night, we sat on the porch after dinner, the three of us, glasses of wine in hand, the soft chirp of insects filling the spaces between conversation. My husband spoke of work again, of emails waiting even now in his inbox, deadlines he'd need to check on in the morning. He spoke with the ease of someone who believed the rest of us were listening. But I wasn't. And neither was his father. His gaze found me often, soft but unwavering. Every time my eyes met his, the air seemed to tighten, the world shrinking to just the space between us. Small glances, brief moments, but each one adding another weight to the scale, tipping slowly toward disaster. When the night grew late, my husband excused himself first, retreating inside to make one last call before bed. His father and I remained, both of us quiet now, the wine warm in my throat, my fingers tapping nervously against the stem of the glass. "You're punishing yourself," he said eventually, breaking the silence without turning to look at me. "I'm trying to be good," I replied, my voice thin. He nodded slowly, still staring out into the dark. "I don't think you remember what good feels like." The words landed heavier than they should have. I felt them settle in my chest, pressing against the place where my resolve had already begun to crack. I stood, brushing off my legs, setting my glass down too quickly, the soft clink of it against the table sounding louder than it should. "I'm going to bed," I said, forcing my voice steady. I didn't wait for his reply. The hallway inside was narrow, the wooden floor creaking beneath my steps, every sound amplified in the quiet of the house. I undressed slowly, folding each piece of clothing with care, slipping into the ivory lace I had packed so thoughtlessly. The mirror caught my reflection. Bare shoulders, soft skin, eyes that looked too wide, too knowing. I pulled a sweater over my shoulders, covering the worst of my guilt, but it did nothing to quiet the racing of my heart. As I slid beneath the cool sheets, my husband's side of the bed still empty, I closed my eyes and tried to slow my breathing. Tried to silence the memory of his voice, of the way his eyes had held mine, steady and unyielding. Sleep didn't come. When my husband finally returned, slipping into bed beside me with the glow of his phone still reflected on his face, he kissed my cheek absently, his lips cool and distant. His hand rested on my hip, familiar, thoughtless, already drifting into sleep before I could decide how I felt about his touch. I lay awake long after his breathing settled into the slow rhythm of dreams. And even then, in the dark, I could feel the pull of the man sleeping in the next room. The morning arrived wrapped in the kind of soft mist that clings to the edges of the windows, blurring the view just enough to make the world outside feel quieter. I stood at the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching the fog roll off the lake. The house was still. My husband's voice drifted faintly from the upstairs bedroom. Another call, another negotiation, another promise that the weekend was about us while his attention was anywhere but here. I didn't blame him. Not really. I had spent years telling myself that his focus, his ambition, his relentless pursuit of success were what made him a good partner, a reliable one. He didn't forget birthdays. He never raised his voice. He came home on time. He was solid, predictable, safe. But safety has a price. I could feel it now, more clearly than ever. The way my body had grown used to absence, how my skin had learned to forget the feeling of hands that touched with intention, with desire. I had told myself for so long that it was enough. That love could survive on stability alone. But the lie tasted bitter now, heavy on my tongue. By the time I heard his father's footsteps behind me, I already knew it was him. I didn't have to look. His presence filled the room differently, quieter, but charged. "You're up early," he said. I nodded, my back still turned to him, eyes fixed on the lake. "Couldn't sleep." "Neither could I." The sound of the chair scraping softly against the floor told me he had sat down at the table behind me. I could feel his gaze, steady, unflinching, waiting for me to turn, to meet it. I didn't. "I thought about last night," he added. I kept my hands wrapped around the mug, fingers tightening just enough that the heat began to sting my palms. The ache grounded me. "So did I admitted, softer than I intended. There was no one else in the room, no one to interrupt, no one to save me from the pull that was getting harder to resist. I turned slowly, met his eyes. There was no apology there, no shame. Only that same quiet certainty that had unraveled me once already. He stood then, closing the space between us without rush, without hesitation. His hand reached out, brushing lightly against my wrist, tracing the line of my pulse with his thumb. The touch was so gentle it felt almost cruel. "We don't have to pretend this didn't happen," he said. I shook my head once, the words catching in my throat. "I'm not pretending." For a long moment, neither of us moved. The tension between us stretched so tight it felt like something might snap. And then I stepped closer. Not much, just enough. Just enough to let him know I wasn't running. His hand moved to my waist, fingers pressing softly into my side, anchoring me there. My breath caught as he leaned in, slow, deliberate, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. The kiss was nothing like the first. There was no hesitation in it, no question. This time it was certain. Intentional. His lips pressed against mine with the weight of everything we hadn't said, everything we couldn't say. And when my hands found the back of his neck, pulling him closer, I felt the sharp sting of tears behind my eyes. Not from guilt, from relief, from wanting, from the terrifying realization that I hadn't felt alive like this in years. I could taste the bitterness of coffee on his lips, feel the roughness of his hands against the soft curve of my back, the way his fingers dug into my sweater, holding on like he was afraid I might disappear. I didn't. The sound of footsteps on the stairs snapped the moment like a thread pulled too tight. We broke apart fast, stepping back into our separate spaces, breaths heavy, eyes wide, hearts pounding. My husband entered the kitchen a moment later, distracted by his phone, scrolling, typing, absorbed. "You started the coffee." "Thanks, babe," he said without looking up. I smiled. Or at least I moved my mouth into something that resembled a smile. "Of course," I replied, my voice steady, my hands trembling just beneath the surface. The day moved on around us, the three of us dancing the polite choreography of shared meals and casual conversations, each of us playing our roles as if nothing had shifted beneath the floorboards of that house. But everything had shifted. Later that afternoon, my husband suggested a hike along the edge of the property, a chance to really unplug, as he called it. He disappeared upstairs to gather his things, and for a few minutes we were alone again. His father stood near the window, looking out at the trees, hands in his pockets. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The space between us still vibrated with the memory of that kiss, the weight of it hanging in the air like smoke. I didn't apologize. Neither did he. Instead, I walked past him, close enough that the edge of my sweater brushed against his arm. I could feel the heat of him even through the thin barrier of fabric, the pulse beneath his skin matching the quick beat of my own heart. I stepped outside into the cool afternoon air, the scent of pine and earth grounding me again, but it did nothing to quiet the storm beneath my ribs. And when my husband called out from the porch, asking if I was ready, I turned back just once, eyes meeting his father's through the window. He nodded, the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. And I knew then, this wasn't over. It hadn't even begun. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. There was no chasing, no pleading glances, no hurried phone calls or desperate words. If anything, he seemed more composed, as if the kiss we had shared had simply folded itself into the fabric of the space between us, a secret stitch so tightly that it couldn't be ripped out without tearing the whole thing apart. But the quiet didn't make it easier. It made it worse. I found myself watching for him when I shouldn't have been, listening for his voice even in rooms where I knew he wasn't. Every innocent gathering, a shared breakfast, a walk around the lake, the three of us sitting side by side on the porch in the evenings, felt like a test of my own endurance. And I was failing. My husband remained oblivious, absorbed in work, in schedules, in being the responsible man he had always been. There were no harsh words between us, no arguments, no cracks on the surface. But there was distance. The kind of distance that no conversation could bridge, because he didn't even realize there was a gap to cross. I started to notice the smallest things. How rarely he touched me when he didn't need to. How his hand on my back felt like an afterthought, a gesture performed out of habit more than want. How, when we sat close on the couch, his knee never brushed against mine. How we spoke so much about logistics, what time dinner would be, which bills needed to be paid, but almost never about how we felt. The simplicity of his father's attention, by contrast, felt dangerous in its clarity. There were no games in the way he looked at me, no masks, just the steady weight of someone who was awake to the fact of my presence. Who saw. It happened again the following week. Another text message, this one shorter than the last, but carrying just as much weight. Do you want to meet for coffee? I stared at the screen longer than I should have, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I should have said no. I knew that. But the truth was, I didn't even consider it. Not really. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place where the windows fog slightly from the steam of espresso machines, where the tables are too close together and the air smells faintly of cinnamon and roasted beans. It was late morning, a quiet lull between the morning rush and the lunch crowd. He was already seated when I arrived, a cup of black coffee in front of him, untouched. I ordered tea, sat across from him. Our knees almost touched beneath the small table, and I had to curl my legs back beneath my chair to keep from feeling the warmth of him so close. We didn't speak right away. There was a strange kind of comfort in the silence between us now. Like we both knew there was no point in pretending that we had come here just to talk about the weather. Finally, he spoke. I'm not going to push you into anything you don't want, he said. I looked down at my hands, fingers tracing the rim of the porcelain cup. That's not the problem, I answered. It's not that I don't want to. His gaze softened, but he didn't smile. He just nodded, letting the words settle between us. I don't want to make your life harder than it already is, he said quietly. But I can't lie and say I don't think about you. I looked up then, met his eyes fully. They held the same steady intensity they always did, but there was something else there too. Something softer, more human. Regret, maybe, or restraint. I think about you too, I said. There was no rush after that. No frantic declarations, no plans. Just a quiet acknowledgement of the space we now occupied, of the choices we weren't making but couldn't seem to walk away from either. When we left the cafe, he walked me to my car, keeping just enough distance to make it look innocent, but close enough that I could feel the pull between us like a string stretched tight. Before I got into the driver's seat, he reached out, barely brushing his fingers against my arm. "Friends, then," he said, his voice low. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because we both knew the word didn't fit. I drove home on autopilot, my hands steady on the wheel, but my mind spinning in 1,000 directions. The words we'd spoken, the words we hadn't. The shape of his mouth when he said my name, the restraint in his eyes, the weight of everything held back. That evening, I cooked dinner like always. My husband sat at the table, scrolling through his phone between bites, telling me about an upcoming business trip he might not be able to get out of. I nodded, asked the right questions, offered the right responses. I played my part well. But inside, I felt the slow burn of something I couldn't put out. Not guilt, desire, not just for him, though that was part of it, but for what he represented, for the feeling of being awake again, of being wanted. Later that night, my husband reached for me beneath the sheets, his touch perfunctory, familiar, his kisses soft but distant. I let him. I let the moment happen the way it always did, my body moving the way it was supposed to. But my mind wasn't there. It was sitting in a cafe, knees almost touching beneath a small table, lips burning from a kiss that still hadn't faded. And somewhere deep down, I understood. Calling it friendship wouldn't save us. It was already something else entirely. The following weeks stretched out longer than they had any right to. Time moved the way it does when you're holding your breath without realizing it, waiting for something to happen, unsure whether you want it to or not. Every day was filled with the same familiar routines. Coffee in the morning, emails, errands, dinner at 7, the soft glow of the television filling the silence between my husband and me in the evenings. And every day, beneath the weight of all that normalcy, the ache pressed harder against my ribs. I kept telling myself it was under control. That distance would make it fade. That with enough time and distraction, I could smooth the edges of whatever had unraveled between us back into something neat and acceptable. I threw myself into small projects, into social obligations, into anything that would keep my hands busy and my thoughts from circling back to the memory of his mouth on mine, the feel of his hand on my waist, the low, steady way he had said my name. But wanting doesn't listen to reason. It was almost 2 weeks before I saw him again. Another dinner at the house, another carefully constructed evening where the surface of everything stayed smooth while the current beneath pulled harder than ever. My husband, as usual, was full of plans, meetings, calls, negotiations, speaking with that calm certainty that came so easily to him. His father, as always, listened politely, offered comments where expected, smiled in the right places. And I sat there, smiling too, feeling like my skin didn't fit right anymore. It wasn't until after dessert, when the plates had been cleared and the soft murmur of my husband's voice floated from the living room as he took yet another business call, that the space between us opened again. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter for the second time, trying to keep my hands from shaking. His voice was soft behind me. "I've been thinking," he said, careful, steady. I didn't turn around. My grip on the dish towel tightened. "We're going up to the house in the mountains next weekend," he continued. "It's quiet there, peaceful. Maybe you should come." The words landed softly but left a bruise just the same. "Just me?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He didn't rush to answer. I could feel him watching me, weighing the weight of every word. "Your husband's schedule is packed. He won't mind the company for his father." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even a suggestion. It was an offer dressed as something casual, something reasonable. But the truth sat right beneath the surface, plain and sharp. I finally turned then, met his eyes and saw the same calm certainty there that had undone me the first time. There was no urgency in his gaze, no desperation, only want. Simple, clear. I should have said no. I told myself that even as I nodded. "I'll think about it," I replied. But I already knew the answer. The days leading up to the trip moved in slow motion. I went through the motions of packing with the same careful attention I'd given the last time. Comfortable clothes, nothing provocative, at least on the outside. But beneath the soft sweaters and jeans, I folded lace and silk into the corners of my suitcase, my fingers trembling more than I wanted to admit. I rehearsed the conversation in my head a dozen times. The way I would explain it to my husband, the way I would sell it as harmless, practical, a favor. And it worked. He didn't question it, barely even blinked. Another trip he couldn't take, another chance to stay home and stay busy. The drive up to the mountains was quiet. Just the two of us in his car, the soft hum of the engine beneath us, the trees lining the highway blurring into long, dark streaks outside the window. He didn't press me to talk, didn't fill the silence with unnecessary words. He just let the quiet settle between us, as steady as his breathing, as sure as the way his hands rested on the steering wheel. When we reached the cabin, the air was cooler than I expected, the sharp bite of the mountain breeze filling my lungs as I stepped out of the car. The place was beautiful in its simplicity. Dark wood against the pale sky, the scent of pine thick in the air, the sound of water from a nearby stream carrying through the trees. Isolated, peaceful, too far from the rest of the world to pretend that we hadn't chosen exactly this. Inside, the space was warm, the soft crackle of a fire already burning in the hearth, the light low and golden. 2 bedrooms, one at either end of the cabin, separated by the small living space and kitchen between them. Enough distance to pretend. Close enough to fail at it. We unpacked quietly, moving through the space with the careful choreography of 2 people trying not to say out loud what was already written in every glance. Dinner was simple. Grilled fish, roasted vegetables, a bottle of wine opened between us. Conversation stayed light, polite, circling around safe topics. But beneath every word, the tension simmered. I could feel it in the way his eyes lingered a little too long on my hands as I poured the wine. In the way his fingers brushed against mine when he passed the salt across the table. In the slow, deliberate way he watched me when he thought I wasn't looking. After dinner, we sat by the fire, the warmth of it soft against my skin, the shadows dancing on the walls around us. The silence between us stretched long, comfortable in its weight, neither of us rushing to fill it. Finally, he spoke. "I told myself I wouldn't ask," he said softly. "But I don't want to pretend either." I met his gaze, steady now, no longer running. "Neither do I," I answered. The words sat there between us, bare and honest, but neither of us moved. Not yet. The fire cracked once, sharp in the quiet, and I understood. Some lines once crossed don't need to be redrawn. They only need to be followed. The night in the cabin stretched on, hour after hour, each one pressing against my chest a little tighter than the last. We didn't touch again that evening. We didn't cross the room or close the distance between us. But somehow the absence of contact felt heavier than any embrace could have. It was there in the way he watched me, steady and patient as I stood by the fire pretending to be absorbed in the flames. It was there in the way my body reacted to the space between us, aching in places I had trained myself to ignore. When I finally retreated into my room, I closed the door softly behind me, leaning back against the wood for a moment before turning the lock. My hands shook as I unbuttoned my jeans, peeling away the soft sweater, standing in nothing but lace and silk, staring at the unfamiliar woman in the mirror across the room. My skin flushed, lips too red, eyes bright with the tension of everything I hadn't done but wanted to. There was something raw in my reflection, something I had tried so hard to suppress that it startled me now to see it so clearly on my face. I pulled the oversized t-shirt over my head, let it hang loose against my body, but even that couldn't dim the way I felt my own pulse throbbing beneath the thin fabric. sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind outside felt amplified in the stillness of the cabin. I turned from side to side, sheets twisted around my legs, my body restless with need, my mind trapped in a loop of all the things I was trying not to imagine. I wondered if he was lying awake too, on the other side of the thin wooden wall. If his hands were clenched into fists like mine, gripping the sheets too tightly, trying to will away the want. Or if he was still sitting by the fire, drinking the last of the wine, staring into the flames, thinking about the same impossible things. When morning came, I was already awake. I rose quietly, tugging on a soft cotton sweater, jeans, tying my hair up quickly and heading into the kitchen where the smell of coffee greeted me like an old habit. He was there before me, standing at the window, a mug in his hand, eyes fixed somewhere out beyond the glass where the trees swayed lightly in the breeze. The air between us felt different now, quieter somehow, but heavier. We ate breakfast like strangers who knew too much about each other. Casual, almost polite. He offered me the last piece of toast. I declined. He poured me another cup of coffee. I said thank you. Every word sat too neatly between the two of us, as if we were both afraid that if we stopped talking, the truth would speak for us. Afterward, we spent the day circling one another, taking long walks through the woods around the cabin, never quite straying too far apart, but never walking side by side either. There was a strange comfort in the distance, but also a cruelty. Like we were punishing ourselves, making the wanting worse just by keeping it contained. I caught him watching me more than once, his eyes resting on the small of my back when I crouched down to pick up a smooth stone from the edge of the stream. On the curve of my neck when I lifted my hair off my shoulders beneath the afternoon sun. I felt every glance like a touch. Back at the cabin that evening, as the sun slipped behind the trees and the light softened to gold, I found myself standing on the porch, arms folded against the chill in the air, staring out at the fading horizon. I thought about my husband then, about the life I had so carefully built with him, the safety of it, the predictability, the way he always came home on time, how he never forgot the small things, the way he kissed me before bed, soft, perfunctory, like clockwork. And I thought about how little of me that life actually touched. There's a kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. A kind of loneliness that grows between two people who stopped seeing each other long before they stopped sharing a bed. I had told myself for so long that it was enough. That stability, respect, partnership were all the things that mattered. But standing there on that porch, my body humming with the memory of a kiss I couldn't forget, I felt the hollowness of that logic. I heard his footsteps approach before I saw him. Slow, unhurried. He stopped beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him through the space that separated us, but not touching. "You're not happy," he said softly. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even meant to be cruel. I stayed silent, eyes fixed on the trees, watching the shadows lengthen across the ground. "I've been watching you for a long time," he continued, voice lower now, but steady. "You do everything right. You keep the house running. You keep the peace. You make it look easy." I swallowed hard, my throat tightening. "But when was the last time someone asked you what you wanted?" he asked. The question landed like a stone in my chest. I could feel the truth of it settling deep beneath my ribs, anchoring itself there where I couldn't ignore it. I turned my head then, slowly, meeting his gaze. His eyes held mine without apology, without fear. "I don't know," I answered, my voice barely more than a whisper. For a moment, neither of us moved. The space between us charged and brittle, a thin line we had drawn and redrawn so many times that it no longer held. He reached out then, slowly, his fingers brushing lightly against my wrist. His touch so soft it could have been mistaken for an accident if not for the way his eyes stayed locked on mine. "I see you," he said simply, and for the first time in a very long time I felt seen. Not as a wife, not as someone's partner, but as myself. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything we couldn't say, everything we couldn't admit, but that lived there anyway, breathing beneath the surface of every glance, every word. When I finally turned back toward the door, stepping inside the cabin, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might crack open my chest. I didn't look back, but I knew he was still there, waiting. There's a silence that comes after certain decisions, a kind of stillness that doesn't feel like peace, but more like the eye of the storm. A brief, aching pause before the full weight of your choices comes crashing down around you. I felt it as I lay awake that night, staring at the wooden beams above my head in the dim light of the cabin room, listening to the quiet hum of the night outside. My body was exhausted, but my mind refused to rest. Every thought looped back on itself, circling the same questions, the same hunger, the same ache that had led me here. I thought of my husband, thought of the man who shared my bed, who lived beside me, who never once imagined that I could be anywhere else in my head while he touched me. I thought of all the years we had built together, the steady, predictable rhythm of life that had once felt so safe. And I thought of how far away I felt from that safety now, how much I had come to resent the very thing I used to hold on to so tightly. It wasn't hate, not even anger. It was absence. Absence of being seen, of being felt, of being wanted. Not just as a wife, not just as a partner who kept the house clean, the calendar full, the laundry folded, but as a woman, as flesh and blood and breath. I didn't remember falling asleep, only waking again to the soft gray light of morning, the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, the sounds of him moving through the space with the same careful grace as always. I stayed in bed longer than usual, letting the minutes pass, watching the shadows shift across the walls. I felt heavy in my own skin. When I finally rose and dressed, I found him outside, stacking firewood neatly by the side of the house. His back was to me, the muscles in his arms flexing beneath the worn sleeves of his shirt as he moved. Steady, patient, controlled. When he turned and saw me, he gave the smallest nod, a quiet acknowledgement. Neither of us smiled. I helped him carry the last of the wood to the pile, working beside him in silence, the air between us thick with everything we weren't saying. Every now and then, our hands brushed, small, accidental touches that felt like sparks in the cold morning air. Neither of us pulled away. Later, as we stood on the porch again, both of us watching the line of trees where the fog still clung low to the ground, he spoke. His voice was softer than the last time, edged with something closer to sadness. "You don't have to keep choosing to be invisible," he said. The words were so gentle, but they sliced through me clean. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat felt too tight. I thought about what it would mean to admit that I wasn't happy, that I hadn't been for longer than I wanted to confess, not even to myself. I thought about what it would mean to tell the truth out loud, not just to him, to me. The next few hours passed slowly. We packed up the cabin, moving through the familiar motions of closing the place down. Dishes cleaned, sheets stripped from the bed, windows latched shut. Everything in order, everything neat. The drive back was as quiet as the drive there, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. This one was heavier. The weight of the things we had let happen, of the things we had allowed to bloom between us, even when we told ourselves we wouldn't. When we reached the city, he parked the car outside my house. My husband's car was already in the driveway, right where I knew it would be. Predictable, reliable, safe. I reached for the handle, ready to leave, ready to slip back into the life I had been wearing like armor for so long. But before I could step out, he spoke one last time. "I'm not asking you to burn your life down," he said. "I'm just asking you not to lie to yourself about what it is." I paused, my fingers tightening around the door handle. I didn't turn to look at him. "Thank you for the ride," I managed, my voice barely steady. When I stepped into the house, my husband greeted me with the same distracted warmth as always. A kiss on the cheek, a comment about dinner plans, a passing mention of an email he needed to answer. I smiled. I nodded. I said all the right things. But inside, I was somewhere else entirely. That night, lying next to him in bed, feeling the familiar weight of his arm draped across my waist, I stared at the ceiling again, just as I had in the cabin. Only this time, I knew there was no undoing what had been done. There had been no grand betrayal, no loud confessions, no scenes of heartbreak or rage. But something had shifted. Something had broken open inside of me. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't even feel guilty the way I thought I would. I felt awake. I felt alive. And I understood, finally, that there are choices we make without meaning to. Lines we cross not in a single moment, but step by step, breath by breath, glance by glance. Until one day we find ourselves standing in the middle of the life we've chosen, looking at the person we've become, wondering how we ever believed we could be anything less. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew this. I couldn't go back to sleep. Not after this.